The letter was buried deep in a drawer, yellowed at the edges, untouched by time, yet heavy with secrets. Margaret hadn't spoken her daughter's name in 11 years, not even in whispers, not even in dreams. When the phone rang that morning, she nearly let it go unanswered, as she always did. But fate has a way of knocking twice, and this time it came in the form of a stranger's trembling voice. The woman said something that made Margaret's knees buckle against the kitchen counter. Her daughter had left behind someone that only Margaret could claim. The old drawer called to her later that night when silence filled the house like an ocean tide. Her hand shook as she slid it open, sifting past receipts, postcards, and faded photographs. Then she found it, an envelope addressed in her daughter's handwriting, sealed, waiting. Margaret pressed it to her chest, afraid to read, more afraid not to. What happens when the past you buried suddenly claws its way back into your life? Can years of silence, betrayal, and pride truly be undone by a few fragile words written on paper? The answer, Margaret knew, was both cruel and merciful. Time does not erase love, it only hardens it until something breaks it open again. And sometimes what breaks it open is the very thing you swore you would never touch. The letter trembled in her hands as though the paper itself carried the weight of a heartbeat. Margaret set it down on the kitchen table, the lamp casting a pale circle of light, and stared at her daughter's familiar handwriting. 11 years. 11 years since that stormy night when words sharper than knives had been spoken, when a door had slammed shut, and when Margaret had vowed never to see her daughter again. 11 years of silence, of bitterness, of waiting for a call that never came. She reached for the envelope, then pulled back as if it might burn her. 1,000 questions stormed her mind. Why had her daughter written this? When? Did she mean for Margaret to read it someday, or had it been left by mistake? She finally tore the paper open, her breath shallow, her eyes already brimming, before a single word was read. Mom, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't tell you face to face. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I have to try. By the time you read this, you may have a granddaughter. Her name is Emily. She's the only thing in this world I've done right. Margaret froze, her chest tightening as though an invisible hand had clamped around her ribs. A granddaughter? She whispered the word aloud, testing it on her lips like something foreign, unreal. She reread the lines again and again, tracing each stroke of ink as if her daughter's voice might rise out of the paper and call her Mom once more. But the letter did not end there. It grew darker. I've made mistakes, ones I never wanted you to see. I ran too far, too fast. I thought I was strong, but I wasn't. Emily deserves better than me, better than the chaos I've made of everything. If I can't make it right, promise me you won't let her grow up alone. Promise me you'll love her the way I couldn't love myself. Margaret pushed her chair back with a violent scrape against the floor. Her palms pressed against her mouth as a sob broke free. The silence of the house seemed to tighten around her. Listening, accusing. She had sworn, hadn't she? Sworn never to see her daughter again, to never let weakness pull her back. But what of a child? An innocent child carrying her daughter's eyes, her laugh, her blood. For the first time in years, Margaret prayed. Not the stiff, rehearsed prayers whispered at Sunday services, but the raw, wordless kind that rise from a wounded heart. As the days quietly slipped away, the voice on the phone echoed in her mind. The woman had introduced herself as a social worker, speaking carefully, gently, as though each word was a fragile crystal. She had asked if Margaret was related to a woman named Claire Dawson, and when Margaret had whispered yes, the social worker had paused, then said softly, "I'm sorry, but Claire passed away last month. She left behind a little girl. We're trying to locate family." The words haunted her. Passed away. Left behind. A little girl. Margaret wandered through the house in a daze, her footsteps stirring the dust of years lived in solitude. Photographs lined the hallway walls. Her daughter at 10, at 15, at 20. The last photo they had taken together hung crooked, its glass cracked from where Margaret had once, in anger, hurled a shoe against the wall. Now she touched the frame with trembling fingers, whispering apologies too late to be heard. But one question gnawed at her. Why had Claire never called? Why had she let pride, distance, and silence grow so wide that even death had crossed it before reconciliation. On the third night after the call, Margaret stood in front of her mirror, clutching the letter once more. She was 68 now, her hair silver, her eyes lined with years of grief, and yet, deep inside, there was still a flicker of the mother she once was, fierce and protective. The flicker grew into a flame the moment she said aloud, "I will find her. I will find Emily." The next morning she dressed with purpose, as though preparing for battle. Her hands ached as she buttoned her blouse, her knees protested as she walked, but her spirit carried her forward. She dialed the social worker's number, her voice steadier than she felt. "Yes," she said, "I'm Margaret Dawson. I'm Claire's mother. Tell me where my granddaughter is." There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. Then the social worker spoke again. "She's in foster care right now. But, Mrs. Dawson, there's something you need to know." Margaret gripped the phone so tightly, her knuckles whitened. "What is it?" The woman's voice softened, carrying both hesitation and urgency. "Emily doesn't know about you. She's only 9 years old. And she's been asking questions about her mother. Hard questions. We didn't know who to give her answers to. Until now." A silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. Margaret's heart pounded as if it might tear free of her chest. 9 years old. Nearly a decade of life she had missed. And now fate was thrusting this child into her arms, asking her to bridge 2 broken lives into something whole. Margaret closed her eyes and whispered, "I'll come. Tell her I'll come." Margaret boarded the bus with a small suitcase, though she knew it wasn't her belongings that weighed her down. It was the storm inside her chest. Through the smudged window, the city blurred by, tall buildings giving way to quiet suburbs, and, finally, to the kind of small-town streets she had not walked in decades. She tried to imagine what it would be like, the moment she would look into Emily's eyes. Would she see her daughter's face staring back at her? Or would the child turn away? A stranger marked by resentment she had not earned. The bus slowed, hissing to a stop, and Margaret's reflection in the glass looked back at her. Silver hair pulled neatly into a bun, a face lined with years of silence and regret. She had never felt more fragile. She had never felt more alive. At the end of the narrow road stood a modest brick house. The lawn was trimmed, the curtains plain. A foster home, Margaret realized. She clutched the strap of her handbag as she walked up the steps, her knuckles rapping on the wooden door with a hesitation that made her feel like a child again. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 50s, kind eyes softened by experience. "Mrs. Dawson?" she asked. "Yes," Margaret managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Come in. Emily is in the living room." Margaret's steps echoed against the hardwood floor, each one bringing her closer to the moment she feared and longed for. And then, in the corner of the room, sitting cross-legged on the rug with a book in her lap, was a girl with chestnut hair falling in loose strands around her face. "Emily," the foster mother said gently, "this is your grandmother." The child lifted her head, her wide brown eyes locking onto Margaret's. For a heartbeat, the world fell silent. Margaret gasped softly because those eyes, those unmistakable eyes, were Claire's. Emily rose slowly, cautious, like a deer unsure of a stranger's hand. "You're my grandma?" she asked, her voice carrying a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Margaret nodded, tears pricking her vision. "Yes, darling, I am." There was a pause, fragile as glass. Then Emily asked, "Did you know my mom?" The question cut through Margaret like a blade. She knelt to the girl's height, her knees trembling, and reached for her hand. "I did," she whispered. "I loved her very much. She was my daughter." Emily's lips parted, her eyes searching Margaret's face for truth, for comfort, for answers that had been denied to her. And in that searching gaze, Margaret felt something stir. An opening, a chance, fragile but real. The first meeting was brief, cautious. Emily's questions came like small stones tossed into a pond, simple, sharp, and heavy with unspoken pain. Why didn't she stay with me? Why didn't she come back? Did she love me? Margaret answered as best she could, her voice breaking with both honesty and restraint. Some truths were too heavy to lay upon a child's shoulders. But that night, back in her hotel room, Margaret unfolded the letter again. She studied every line, every scratch of ink, searching for clues in her daughter's confession. There was something missing, something she wasn't telling her. Claire had not only run away from Margaret, she had run away from something else, something darker. And now, as Margaret replayed the social worker's words in her head, she realized a new fear was taking root. If Claire's past was dangerous enough to hide from, what would stop it from reaching Emily too? Margaret returned the next afternoon, carrying a small box of shortbread cookies and an old photo album she had not opened in years. Emily met her at the door this time, shy but expectant, her eyes darting between curiosity and hesitation. "I thought we could look at some pictures together," Margaret said softly, holding up the album. Emily hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside to let her in. They sat together on the sofa, the album resting on their laps, its pages yellowed but alive with moments that no time could erase. "This was your mom, Barsis," Margaret explained, pointing to a photo of Claire at 7, her hair in pigtails, her smile wide enough to light the room. Emily leaned in closer, her small fingers brushing the photo. "She looks happy," she whispered. "She was," Margaret said, her voice trembling. "She was full of dreams. She loved to climb trees, to sing when she thought no one was listening. She had a laugh that made everyone laugh with her." Emily's lips curved into the smallest of smiles. "I laugh loud too," she admitted. Margaret laughed through her tears. "Yes, you do." Piece by piece, day by day, the ice between them began to crack. They shared cookies, stories, quiet walks in the garden. Emily asked questions with a hunger Margaret recognized. Questions about her mother, about the past, about where she had come from. Margaret answered carefully, gently weaving truth and tenderness together, hoping to protect her from the harsher edges of reality. But shadows lurked at the edges of their fragile bond. One evening, as Emily curled beside her on the sofa, Margaret noticed the child tracing patterns on her wrist with a nervous habit. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" she asked. Emily looked down, her voice no louder than a whisper. "At school, they said my mom was a bad person. They said she did things. That's why she left me." Margaret's heart clenched. She reached for Emily's hands, firm but tender. "Listen to me. Your mother was not a bad person. She was hurting. She made mistakes, yes, but she loved you more than anything. Do you understand?" Emily's eyes brimmed with tears. Then why didn't she stay? The question shattered Margaret inside. She swallowed hard, searching for words. Sometimes love is not enough to keep someone whole. "But she wrote to me, Emily. She asked me to promise something. She wanted me to make sure you never grew up alone." For the first time, Emily leaned fully against her, resting her head on Margaret's shoulder. Margaret held her tightly, a warmth spreading through her chest, a warmth she had not felt in more than a decade. Yet that night, when Emily was asleep, Margaret unfolded the letter once more. This time, she noticed something she had overlooked, a line written at the bottom in a hurried, uneven script. "If anyone asks, don't trust him. Don't let him near her. Promise me." There was no name, no explanation, just a warning. Margaret's hands shook as she read the words again. Who was him? What had Claire been running from? And, most terrifying of all, did he know about Emily? The warning at the bottom of the letter haunted Margaret. Each time she tried to close her eyes, it flared again in her mind, like a flame refusing to be smothered. Don't trust him. Don't let him near her. The words had been written with haste, almost desperation, as if Claire had been running out of time when she scrawled them. Margaret folded the paper again, her hands trembling. She slipped it into her handbag, closer than a heartbeat, unwilling to leave it behind for even a moment. The following days became a rhythm of fragile normalcy. Margaret visited Emily every afternoon after school. They walked to the park together, sharing ice cream, watching ducks glide over the pond. Emily's laugh came more easily now, her hand occasionally slipping into Margaret's as though testing the safety of that touch. Margaret, in turn, rediscovered a part of herself she had buried years ago. The mother she once was, now reborn as a grandmother. But it wasn't only Emily who was changing. Margaret felt something stirring inside her, something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. The idea that perhaps, even after so much silence, so much loss, she was being given another chance, not to rewrite the past, but to shape the future. One evening, as they left the park, Margaret noticed a man leaning against a black car near the edge of the lot. He was watching the children play. At first she thought little of it. Parents often waited for their kids, but as she and Emily walked past, Margaret felt his eyes follow them. A chill crept over her. She held Emily's hand tighter and quickened their pace. That night, back in her hotel room, she replayed the scene again and again. The man's sharp jawline, the way he had tilted his head as if recognizing something, the faint smirk that lingered as they passed. Margaret's heart pounded. Was it paranoia? Or was this him, the one Claire had warned about? The next day she brought the letter to the social worker. The woman's brow furrowed as she read the last line. "We don't have a record of who Claire was afraid of," she said gently. "She never filed any reports, but she did move often, more than most. There were rumors she was involved with someone dangerous, someone who wouldn't let her go." Margaret's throat tightened. "And now?" The social worker hesitated. "Now we just have to be careful, for Emily's sake." Margaret left the office with her heart heavy, her instincts sharper than they had been in years. She began to notice shadows where she hadn't before, footsteps a little too close behind her on the street, a car idling a little too long at the corner. And though she tried to keep her fears hidden, Emily sensed the change. "Grandma," she asked one afternoon, her small hand tugging at Margaret's sleeve, "why do you keep looking over your shoulder?" Margaret forced a smile. "Just making sure we're safe, sweetheart." But deep inside, she knew safety was something fragile, easily shattered. And if the man she had seen at the park was indeed connected to Claire's past, then their fragile world was about to break wide open. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with strokes of fire and gold, Margaret tucked Emily into bed at the foster home. The girl held tightly to her stuffed rabbit, her voice drowsy but earnest. "Will you come tomorrow too?" Emily asked. Margaret kissed her forehead. "I'll come every day I can." Emily smiled, her eyelids fluttering closed. "Good, because I don't want to be alone anymore." Margaret's chest tightened. She sat in the darkened room for a while, watching Emily sleep, listening to the steady rhythm of her breath. In that fragile silence, Margaret made a vow. Whatever ghosts haunted her daughter's past, whatever danger lingered in the shadows, she would face it. She had already lost a daughter. She would not lose a granddaughter. And yet, as she left the foster home that night, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her from across the street. The days stretched into weeks, and the rhythm of Margaret's visits began to weave itself into Emily's young life. Every afternoon, the girl would run to meet her at the gate, her laughter spilling through the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. For Margaret, those moments became sacred, each one a fragile thread, repairing a bond she thought had been severed forever. They painted together at the kitchen table, Emily's brushstrokes wild and free, Margaret's more careful, more restrained. "You paint like your mother did," Margaret whispered one afternoon, her eyes stinging, as Emily held up a canvas splashed with bright colors. She loved filling the world with color, even when everything around her seemed gray. Emily tilted her head. "Did she ever paint with you?" Margaret hesitated, her throat tightening. Memories of slammed doors and bitter arguments surfaced, but she pushed them aside. "Once," she said softly. "It was a long time ago, but I still remember it." Emily smiled faintly. "Then maybe we can paint together lots of times, so you'll remember that too." Margaret's chest ached with both joy and grief. In those small moments, she felt as though life was offering her a second chance, not to erase what had been lost, but to create something new. Yet the shadows did not vanish. Margaret continued to notice the car, the same black sedan, parked at odd places near the foster home, near the park, even once outside the grocery store where she had taken Emily to buy strawberries. All was distant, never close enough to be certain, but present, watching. One evening, after leaving Emily at the foster home, Margaret decided not to take her usual route back to the hotel. She turned down side streets, doubling back, testing her suspicion. When she finally glanced over her shoulder, her stomach dropped. The car was there, a block behind, moving slowly, patiently, like a predator, unwilling to strike until the time was right. Her breath quickened. She ducked into a small cafe, the bell over the door jingling as she rushed inside. From the corner booth, she watched through the window. The car passed once, twice, then disappeared into the night. Margaret pressed her hand to her chest. She could no longer tell herself this was paranoia. Someone was watching, someone who knew who she was and who Emily was. The next day she brought her fears to the social worker again, but the woman frowned, uncertain. "Without proof, Mrs. Dawson, there's little we can do. If someone is following you, it might be unrelated. But," her voice softened, "if you believe it's tied to Claire's past, we'll need to be extremely cautious. We don't want Emily frightened unless we must." Margaret left the office frustrated, anger sparking through her fear. She had been powerless once, letting silence and pride separate her from her daughter. She would not be powerless again. That evening, she returned to the hotel and opened the letter yet again, tracing the last words with her finger. "Don't trust him. Don't let him near her. Promise me." But who was him? A lover? A friend turned enemy? The father of Emily? The thought chilled her to the bone. What if the man Claire had been running from all those years was Emily's own father? Margaret barely slept, and when morning came she went to the foster home earlier than usual, her heart hammering. She needed to see Emily, to hold her, to reassure herself that the child was still safe. But when she arrived, the foster mother stood on the porch, pale and shaken. "Mrs. Dawson," she said in a trembling voice, "you need to come inside. There was a man here this morning. He asked for Emily." Margaret's blood ran cold. The foster mother's hands trembled as she poured tea, though neither she nor Margaret touched their cups. The clock ticked loudly in the quiet kitchen, each second a hammer against Margaret's chest. "What did he say?" Margaret asked, her voice raw, her fingers gripping the edge of the table as though it were the only thing keeping her from falling apart. The woman swallowed hard. "He knocked on the door early this morning, said his name was Daniel. He claimed to be Emily's father?" Margaret felt the air leave her lungs. Emily's father. The words landed like stones. "He was polite," the woman continued, though her voice shook. "Too polite. He asked if Emily was here, said he wanted to see her. I told him he needed to go through proper channels, that I couldn't let strangers in. He didn't argue, just smiled, and said he'd be back." Margaret's stomach twisted. The letter's warning blazed in her mind. Don't let him near her. That evening, Margaret sat beside Emily as the child colored quietly at the table, her brow furrowed in concentration. The innocence of her small world, the crayons, the laughter, the stories, felt like fragile glass, and Margaret knew how quickly it could shatter. "Emily," she said gently, "do you know anyone named Daniel?" Emily paused, her crayon hovering above the page. She frowned, thoughtful, then shook her head. "No. Why?" Margaret forced a smile. "Just wondering." But inside, her fears grew darker. If Daniel was indeed Emily's father, then he was the ghost Claire had been running from. And if he had finally found them, it meant the past was no longer chasing. It had caught up. The following days became a battle of vigilance. Margaret altered her routes, watching every shadow, every car that lingered too long. She barely slept, lying awake in the stiff hotel bed, her ears tuned to every creak of the building, every footstep in the hall. Emily, sensitive as ever, noticed the change. "You're scared," she said one afternoon, her young voice carrying the kind of perception children should not have. Margaret pulled her close, stroking her hair. "I'm not scared, sweetheart. I'm careful. That's what we do when we love someone. We take care." But the truth was, she was scared, terrified, because every instinct told her that Daniel would return, and when he did, he would not leave so politely. The storm broke one evening as Margaret walked Emily home from the park. The sun had already dipped below the trees, shadows spilling across the path. Emily chattered about her drawing from school, her small hand swinging in Margaret's. Then, from across the street, a man stepped out of the darkness. "Emily," he called softly. Margaret froze. The man was tall, his hair dark, his smile coldly charming, his eyes fixed on the girl, not on Margaret. Emily stopped, confusion in her face. "Do you know him?" Margaret asked quickly, her grip tightening. Emily shook her head. "No." The man took a step closer. "Emily, I'm your father." Margaret's heart slammed against her ribs. She pulled Emily behind her, her voice trembling but fierce. "You will stay away from her." Daniel tilted his head, his smile unfaltering. "I have every right to see my daughter." "You lost that right when Claire ran from you," Margaret snapped. "She warned me about you." His smile faltered for the first time, a flicker of something darker crossing his face. "Claire isn't here anymore, is she? And you—" He looked Margaret up and down with disdain. You're too old, too weak to keep her from me." Emily clutched Margaret's hand, her small body trembling. Margaret stood taller, summoning a strength she thought she had buried with her regrets. "Try me," she whispered. For a long moment silence stretched between them, the only sound Emily's quickened breathing. Then Daniel smirked, stepping back into the shadows. "This isn't over," he said. "I'll be back." Margaret's legs shook as she led Emily quickly away, her heart pounding. She knew now that Claire's warning had been no exaggeration. Daniel was dangerous, and he wasn't going to stop. Margaret barely slept after that night. She sat in the stiff armchair of her hotel room, staring at the door as if Daniel might burst through it at any moment. Every creak of the building, every passing car outside, set her nerves on edge. Her hand never strayed far from her handbag, where the letter lay folded, fragile yet burning with truth. The next morning, she marched into the social services office, her steps heavy, her face pale with fury and fear. "He came," she told the social worker, her voice sharp. "Daniel, he claimed to be Emily's father." The woman's expression darkened, her hands folding tightly on the desk. "Did he threaten you?" Margaret hesitated. "Not directly, but he said he'd be back, and I believe him. Claire warned me in this letter. She ran from him. She was terrified. We can't let him near Emily." The social worker nodded gravely. "If he's asserting paternity, he may try to pursue it legally. But if Claire never listed him on the birth certificate, his case will be complicated. Until then, we can file for a restraining order, especially if you and the foster mother provide statements." Margaret's fists clenched. "Do it! Whatever it takes. Emily is not safe with him." The paperwork began, but Margaret knew ink on paper was only as strong as the man who chose to respect it. And Daniel's eyes, those cold, unyielding eyes, had told her he respected nothing. Meanwhile, Emily clung closer. She refused to leave Margaret's side, her questions multiplying in whispers at bedtime. "Why did he say he's my dad? Why didn't Mom tell me? Why do you hate him?" Margaret's heart tore with every question. "Because," she said carefully, stroking Emily's hair, "sometimes people say they love us, but they don't know how to love in the right way. Your mom wanted to keep you safe. She wanted to protect you from things you weren't ready for." Emily frowned, her young eyes wise beyond their years. "So he's bad?" Margaret closed her eyes. "He's dangerous, and that's all you need to know right now." But children have a way of sensing truths adults wish to hide. Emily began to draw pictures, dark scribbles of faceless men, of a girl hiding, of a rabbit clutched close in fear. Margaret kept them, each one a reminder of the shadows her granddaughter carried, shadows she vowed to banish. Still, Daniel's presence grew bolder. He was seen near the school one morning, standing across the street. Another evening, the foster mother spotted him parked at the corner, his window rolled down, cigarette smoke curling into the twilight, always watching, always waiting. Margaret began to fear leaving Emily even for a moment. She walked her to school, sat outside the classroom until lessons began, and returned hours early to wait at the gate. The foster mother, though kind, grew anxious. "Mrs. Dawson, we can't live like this. We need more protection." Margaret nodded, though inside she felt the crushing weight of helplessness. She was nearly 70 years old. She could barely climb stairs without her knees protesting. How could she shield a child from a man half her age, stronger, ruthless, determined? And yet, each time Emily's small hand curled into hers, each time the girl whispered, "Don't leave me, Grandma," Margaret found a strength she didn't know she still possessed. One evening, as rain hammered against the windows, Margaret sat alone, staring at her daughter's letter again, her eyes fixed on the hurried scrawl of the last line. "Don't let him near her. Promise me," she whispered aloud into the storm, her voice breaking. "I promise, Claire, I won't fail her. Not like I failed you." But even as she spoke, a knock echoed against the door of the foster home. Firm, demanding. The foster mother froze, her eyes wide with dread. Margaret rose slowly, her heart pounding in her ears. She knew, without opening it, who stood on the other side. Daniel had come back. The knock came again, harder this time, rattling the door against its frame. Margaret's pulse surged, her palms damp. Emily peeked out from the hallway, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide with fear. "Go upstairs, sweetheart," Margaret whispered firmly. "Stay in your room. Don't come out." Emily hesitated. "Grandma!" "Now, Emily." The girl obeyed, her small footsteps pattering quickly up the stairs. Margaret drew a slow, shaky breath and turned to the foster mother, who hovered near the kitchen, pale as paper. "Stay with her," Margaret said. "I'll handle this." She stepped toward the door, her knees weak, her heart pounding so loudly. She thought Daniel must hear it. Slowly she unlatched the chain, but kept the deadbolt in place. "Who is it?" she called through the wood, her voice steadier than she felt. A pause, then his voice smooth and cold. "You know who it is. Open the door, Margaret." Her grip tightened on the knob. "You have no right to be here." "I have every right," he said calmly. "She's my daughter." Margaret's fury burned through her fear. "You forfeited that right when Claire ran from you. When she begged me—" She stopped herself, realizing she had said too much. The silence on the other side of the door shifted, sharp as a blade. "Ah," Daniel murmured. "So, she told you. She always was dramatic, wasn't she? But I'm not here to hurt anyone. I just want to see Emily." Margaret slammed her hand against the door, her voice trembling with rage. "You will never see her. Do you hear me? Never." The charm in his voice cracked, replaced by something colder. "You think you can keep me away? An old woman? I'll be back, Margaret. And next time, I won't be asking." The sound of his footsteps retreated into the night, but the dread he left behind seeped into the walls, into Margaret's very bones. She staggered back, pressing her hand to her chest, gasping for breath. The foster mother hurried in, her face pale. "He's dangerous. We need the police." Margaret nodded, her resolve hardening. "Yes, but the law won't be enough. If he wants Emily, he'll find a way. I need to protect her myself." Upstairs, Margaret found Emily curled on the bed, tears streaking her face. She sat beside her, gathering the girl into her arms. Emily's voice was small, trembling. "Was that him? The man who says he's my dad?" Margaret pressed a kiss to her hair, her own tears spilling freely. "Yes, sweetheart, but listen to me. He will not take you." "I swear it." "Promise?" Emily whispered. Margaret closed her eyes, clutching her granddaughter tightly. "I promise. On your mother's memory, I promise." But deep inside, she knew promises were fragile things, and Daniel was not a man who believed in boundaries. The next day, the restraining order was filed. Police took statements, patrol cars circled the Foster neighborhood. Yet Margaret felt no safer. She could see it in Daniel's eyes when he spoke. Restraint meant nothing to him. And sure enough, that night, a note was slipped under the Foster home's door. No envelope, just a scrap of paper with sharp, uneven handwriting. "You can't hide her forever." The note lay on the table between them, the words searing into Margaret's mind like a brand. "You can't hide her forever." Her hands trembled as she traced the letters, imagining Daniel slipping through the night to deliver it, his shadow pressed against the window, his eyes watching from the darkness. The foster mother spoke first, her voice tight with fear. "We need to move her. If he knows where we live—" Margaret cut her off. "He'll find her no matter where she goes. He's not after a house, he's after her." That night, Margaret lay awake in the guest room upstairs, listening to the house breathe. Every creak of the floorboards, every whistle of wind against the window made her heart lurch. She thought of Claire, her laughter as a child, her fury as a teenager, her despair as a young woman, and finally, her plea in that letter. "Don't let him near her. Promise me." By dawn, Margaret knew she could not rely on the law or the foster system, or even locked doors. If Daniel came, it would be her strength alone standing between Emily and danger. The following days felt like walking a tightrope above a storm. Margaret clung to normalcy for Emily's sake, school runs, homework, bedtime stories, but the tension lingered in every glance over her shoulder, every parked car, every unfamiliar face in a crowd. Emily sensed it, though she tried to be brave. "Grandma," she whispered one night, clutching her rabbit, "if he comes, you'll protect me, right?" Margaret kissed her forehead, her voice fierce, despite the tears threatening to spill. "With my life, sweetheart, with everything I have." The storm broke sooner than she feared. It was a Friday evening, the air heavy with the scent of rain. Margaret and Emily walked home from the library, books stacked in Emily's arms, her chatter filling the silence. As they turned onto the quiet street, headlights flared behind them. A black car rolled to a stop, its door swinging open. Daniel stepped out. "Emily," he called, his voice smooth, coaxing, Come here, sweetheart. Emily froze, the book slipping from her hands. Her rabbit clutched tight. Margaret pulled her close, her heart slamming against her ribs. Stay behind me, she whispered. Daniel took a step forward, his smile tight. Margaret, this has gone on long enough. You can't keep her from me. I'm her father. You are nothing, Margaret spat, her voice shaking but fierce. Nothing but the reason her mother ran until it killed her. You will not touch her. His eyes hardened, the charm vanishing. He lunged. Margaret shoved Emily behind her, bracing herself though her body screamed with age and weakness. She felt his hand clamp around her arm, rough and bruising. Pain shot through her, but she met his gaze, unyielding. You will not take her, she hissed. Over my dead body. For a moment, time froze. His grip on her arm, Emily's terrified cries, the roar of her own heartbeat in her ears, and then headlights blazed from the other end of the street. A police car screeched to a halt, officers leaping out. Step away from her, Daniel cursed, shoving Margaret hard against the hood of his car before breaking into a run. Officers gave chase, their shouts echoing into the night. Margaret gasped for breath, clutching her ribs, but she didn't care. She turned, searching for Emily. The girl was on the sidewalk, trembling, tears streaming down her face. Margaret staggered toward her, gathering her into her arms. It's over, sweetheart, she whispered fiercely. He won't touch you, not ever. But even as she spoke, she knew it wasn't truly over. Men like Daniel didn't vanish into the night. They returned again and again until someone stopped them for good. And Margaret swore to herself that if the law could not end this, she would. The days after the attempted abduction unfolded like a fragile truce with fate. Police cars circled the neighborhood more often now, their presence both reassuring and unnerving. The foster mother double-checked locks and closed curtains tightly at dusk. Margaret slept little, her ears straining through the night for footsteps, for the sound of a car pulling up, for the faintest sign that Daniel had returned. Emily clung to her more than ever. The girl had stopped asking questions. Instead, she sought comfort in silence, curling against Margaret during bedtime stories, her small fingers knotted in her grandmother's sleeve as though afraid to let go. Margaret read aloud until Emily's eyes closed, her voice steady even when her own chest ached. For a brief moment, Margaret allowed herself to believe it might be over, that perhaps the police had scared Daniel enough to make him disappear. But in her heart, she knew men like him didn't fade into shadows. They waited, watching, until the moment was right. That moment came on a night when the rain lashed violently against the windows, thunder shaking the house. Margaret was downstairs warming milk for Emily when a sudden noise shattered her calm. A window creaked open upstairs. Her blood turned cold. She dropped the kettle, scalding liquid splashing over the counter, and ran for the stairs. "Emily!" The girl's scream tore through the house. Margaret burst into the bedroom just in time to see Daniel's figure looming at the window, his arm reaching for Emily as she scrambled back against the wall, clutching her rabbit in terror. "No!" Margaret roared, throwing herself forward with a strength she didn't know her body still possessed. She slammed into him, her hands clawing at his arms, her nails drawing blood. He snarled, shoving her aside, but she clung to him like a lioness, refusing to release. "You will not take her!" she screamed, her voice raw, primal. Daniel's hand struck her across the face, the force sending her crashing to the floor. Pain shot through her, but still she crawled forward, dragging herself between him and Emily. "Run! Emily!" she cried. "Go!" But Emily, sobbing, clung to her instead. Daniel seized Margaret by the hair, yanking her head back. "You think you can stop me, old woman? She's mine. Always was." And then Emily's voice pierced the storm. "No, you're not my dad. Grandma is my family." The words, fierce and broken, cut through the chaos like lightning. For a split second, Daniel faltered. Margaret, through blood and pain, used that sliver of hesitation. She reached for the lamp on the bedside table and swung it with all the strength left in her bones. The crash was deafening. Daniel staggered, glass cutting across his cheek, his snarl twisting into a roar of rage. But before he could lunge again, red and blue lights flashed against the rain-soaked window. The room flooded with shouts. "Police! Freeze!" Officers stormed in, dragging Daniel down as he thrashed and cursed. Margaret collapsed against the bed, her arms wrapping around Emily, who buried her face in her chest, sobbing uncontrollably. "It's over, sweetheart," Margaret whispered through her own tears, rocking the child in her arms. "It's over. He can't hurt you anymore." The officers hauled Daniel away, his voice echoing down the stairs like the last growl of a dying beast. "She's mine. She'll always be mine." But Margaret held Emily tighter, whispering fiercely, "No, she's mine now, and no one will ever take her from me again." The storm raged outside, but inside the room, a new calm began to take root. The fragile, trembling calm of survival, of love reclaimed, of a promise finally kept. The trial was swift but heavy with tension. Margaret sat in the courtroom, her hand clasping Emily's, as Daniel faced the judge with the same cold smirk he had worn that first night at the park. His lawyer argued rights, paternity, and intentions, but the evidence stacked high against him. The restraining order violations, the attempted abduction, the scars on Margaret's arms, the testimony of terrified witnesses. Emily, too young to take the stand, was spared the trauma. But her presence in the room was enough. Every time Daniel's eyes flicked toward her, Margaret squeezed her granddaughter's hand, shielding her with her body, her love, her very existence. When the verdict was finally read, guilty on multiple counts, sentenced to years behind bars, Margaret felt her chest collapse with relief. She looked at Daniel one last time, meeting his glare with unwavering defiance. "It's over," she whispered, though only Emily heard her. Afterward, life unfolded slowly, tenderly. Emily was officially placed in Margaret's custody, and for the first time in years, Margaret's house, once a prison of silence, was filled with the laughter of a child. They painted walls in bright colors together, Emily choosing yellows and blues, Margaret climbing the ladder despite her knees aching, laughing when Emily smeared paint across her cheek. They cooked dinners side by side, Emily's hands clumsy with flour, Margaret teaching her how to knead dough, how to stir soup until it tasted like home. At night, they sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge one by one. Emily would rest her head against Margaret's shoulder, her voice soft. "Grandma, do you think Mom can see us?" Margaret would close her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Yes, sweetheart, I believe she can, and I think she's proud." The nightmares came, of course, shadows in Emily's sleep, echoes of Daniel's voice. Margaret woke each time, holding her until the trembling eased, whispering over and over, "You're safe now. I've got you. You're safe." And with each passing month, the bond between them deepened, not as replacement for what was lost, but as something entirely new. Emily filled the empty rooms of Margaret's heart, and Margaret gave Emily the one thing she had been denied for so long: safety, belonging, unconditional love. One spring afternoon, Margaret found Emily in the garden, her hands covered in dirt as she planted marigolds. The girl looked up, her smile wide. "Grandma, I want to stay here forever. Can I?" Margaret's throat tightened. She knelt beside her, ignoring the ache in her joints, and cupped the child's face in her hands. "Yes, Emily, this is your home, always." Emily hugged her fiercely, and in that embrace, Margaret felt the final pieces of her broken heart knit back together. Years later, as Emily grew into a young woman, the shadows of the past faded into memory, softened, but never forgotten. The letter remained tucked safely in a wooden box on Margaret's nightstand, a reminder of Claire's love, her pain, and her final plea. Margaret often read it when Emily was asleep, tracing the words with gentle fingers, whispering into the quiet, "I kept my promise, Claire. I kept her safe, and she is loved." And for the first time in decades, Margaret felt peace. The weeks after Daniel's sentencing brought a strange quiet into Margaret's life. For the first time in years, her house became a place of warmth again. Emily's shoes by the door, her drawings scattered across the fridge, the sound of her laughter echoing down the hallway. All of it breathed life back into walls that had long been suffocated by silence. Margaret, though older, found herself rising earlier, cooking breakfasts she hadn't prepared in years, pancakes with strawberries, scrambled eggs with too much butter, toast slathered with jam. Emily would shuffle into the kitchen, her hair tangled, her rabbit still clutched in one hand. "Grandma, you make the best pancakes," she would mumble through sleepy eyes. Margaret would smile, hiding her tears in the steam of the skillet. Those words, simple as they were, stitched something inside her that had been torn open the night Claire walked away. The days became a gentle routine. School runs in the morning, Emily's chatter spilling into the car about teachers and friends. Afternoons in the garden, Emily planting flowers, while Margaret carefully guided her hands, showing her how deep to set the roots. Evenings filled with stories, some from books, others from Margaret's own memories of Claire as a little girl. At first, Margaret worried about mentioning Claire. She feared the pain would be too sharp, too heavy for Emily to bear. But Emily wanted to know. She asked, quietly at first, then with growing courage, "What was my mom like? Did she like chocolate? Did she sing? Did she ever smile like me?" And so Margaret told her. She told her about the way Claire had once twirled in the living room with a scarf tied around her waist, declaring she would be a dancer. She told her about the nights Claire had stayed up late, scribbling in notebooks, dreaming of becoming a writer. She told her about the times they had fought, yes, but also the times they had laughed so hard they had collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. She wasn't perfect, Margaret admitted one evening, as they sat on the porch swing, stars flickering overhead. But she loved fiercely, and she loved you more than you'll ever know. Emily leaned against her shoulder, quiet for a long time. "Then I'll remember her like that," she whispered. Margaret kissed her hair, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Still, the past left shadows. Emily sometimes woke screaming, the echoes of Daniel's voice still clawing at her dreams. Margaret would rush to her side, holding her close until the tremors eased. She would whisper into the darkness, "You're safe now. He can't reach you, I promise." Slowly, the nightmares faded. Months turned into years. Emily grew taller, her laughter brighter, her questions sharper. At 12, she announced she wanted to be a painter, showing Margaret canvases splashed with wild color. At 13, she baked a cake for Margaret's birthday, burnt on the edges, too much sugar, but served with a proud grin that made it the sweetest thing Margaret had ever eaten. By 14, Emily was asking deeper questions. "Grandma, did you ever stop loving Mom when you didn't talk for so long?" The words hit Margaret like stones. She set down her teacup, her hands trembling. "No, sweetheart, I never stopped. I was angry. I was proud. I thought I was protecting myself, but love doesn't vanish. It only hides under the hurt." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Then, I won't stop loving you, no matter what happens." Margaret pulled her close, her voice breaking. "That's all I could ever hope for." By 16, Emily had blossomed into a young woman. She carried Claire's features, the same determined jaw, the same eyes that seemed to see straight through people. But her laughter was freer, lighter, shaped by the safety Margaret had fought so hard to give her. One evening, Emily came home from school flushed with excitement. "Grandma, they're hosting an art exhibition. They want me to display one of my paintings." Margaret's chest swelled with pride. "Of course they do. Your work has life in it. Your mother would be proud." Emily hugged her, and for the first time, Margaret felt not just like a guardian, but like the beginning of a new legacy, one born from survival, healing, and love. Yet age crept into Margaret quietly. Her knees ached more, her breath shortened on the stairs. Some mornings she woke with pain so sharp it brought tears to her eyes. But each time Emily appeared in the doorway, her smile bright, her arms wrapping around her, Margaret found strength she thought she had lost. "I'm not going anywhere," she would whisper, more to herself than to Emily, "not until I know she's ready." And Emily was ready, strong, brave, full of dreams. But Margaret knew life was fragile, and one day she would have to let go. By the time Emily turned 18, the house no longer echoed with the quiet of old age. It rang with the sound of music, the smell of oil paints, the energy of youth. Margaret often sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, watching Emily transform canvases into explosions of color, each brushstroke filled with life. It reminded her of Claire, but softer, freer, as though Emily had inherited not her mother's pain, but her hope. On the night of Emily's graduation, Margaret sat in the auditorium surrounded by parents and families. When Emily walked across the stage, her cap tilted slightly to the side, her gown swaying with every step, Margaret's heart swelled so much it felt as though it might burst. The applause thundered, but all Margaret heard was her own voice whispering, "You made it, sweetheart. You made it." Afterward, Emily wrapped her arms around her. "Grandma, I couldn't have done this without you." Margaret held her tightly. "No, Emily, you did this yourself. I just made sure you had the chance." But Emily shook her head, her eyes shining. "You gave me more than a chance. You gave me a home, a family. You saved me." Margaret pressed her forehead against hers, her voice breaking. "Then I kept my promise." That night, as they walked home beneath a sky heavy with stars, Margaret thought of Claire. She imagined her daughter watching from some distant place, her proud smile lighting the heaven. For the first time, Margaret felt not just peace, but gratitude for the pain, for the loss, for the letter that had brought Emily back into her arms. Years passed. Emily pursued art with a fire that astonished Margaret. Her paintings were accepted into galleries. Her name began to spread, and soon she was traveling to exhibitions in nearby cities. Margaret, though her body weakened, encouraged every step, standing proudly in the crowd even when her legs trembled from the effort. One evening, Emily returned from a gallery opening with a gift. She set it on the table before Margaret, wrapped in brown paper. "Open it," she said, her smile wide. Margaret peeled back the paper to reveal a canvas. At first, she thought it was a portrait of Claire, until she looked closer. It was Emily, painted in vivid strokes, holding Margaret's hand. Behind them, faint but radiant, was the image of Claire, smiling, watching over them both. Margaret's breath caught, her hands trembling as she touched the frame. "Emily, it's beautiful." "It's us," Emily said softly. "All of us, together." Margaret pulled her into an embrace, her tears falling freely. "Thank you, sweetheart. You've given me back everything I thought I lost." But time was merciless. By her late 70s, Margaret's body had grown frail. Climbing the stairs became impossible. Emily moved her bed into the sunlit sitting room where she could watch the garden. Her hands shook, her breath came shallow, but her spirit remained fierce. Emily, now a young woman of 23, became the caretaker. She cooked, cleaned, painted in the evenings, while Margaret rested nearby. She never left her side for long. One night, Margaret woke to find Emily sitting by her bed, sketching by lamplight. "Sweetheart, you should sleep," she whispered. Emily shook her head, smiling softly. "I don't want to waste a moment. Not with you." Margaret reached for her hand, fragile against the strength of Emily's youth. "You won't lose me." "Not really. I'll always be with you, just as your mother is. You'll carry us both in your heart." Emily's eyes glistened with tears. "I'm not ready to let you go." Margaret stroked her cheek, her own tears falling. "I wasn't ready to let your mother go either. But love is stronger than time, stronger than loss. You'll feel me with you, always." Silence settled, soft and heavy, as the two held each other's gaze. In that moment, Margaret knew her life had come full circle. She had failed once, let pride steal her daughter from her arms, but she had redeemed herself in the fierce, unwavering love she had given her granddaughter. She had kept her promise. The final winter of Margaret's life arrived quietly, with snow falling soft against the windows, and the world outside hushed in white. Inside the house, Emily tended to her with the same care Margaret had once given her. Blankets pulled snug around her shoulders, tea brought steaming in delicate cups, the room filled with soft music and the warmth of firelight. Margaret's body was frail, her hands trembling, her breath shallow, but her eyes remained sharp, clear, full of love every time they landed on Emily. One evening, as the fire crackled low, Margaret beckoned Emily closer. "Bring me the box," she whispered. Emily frowned gently. "Which box?" "The one in my nightstand. The letter." Emily obeyed, returning with the wooden box, its hinges creaking as she opened it. Inside lay the faded envelope, the paper yellowed, the ink still strong despite the years. Margaret held it in her hands, stroking the worn edges as if it were the most precious thing she owned. "This letter, it saved us. It broke me, yes, but it also gave me a second chance. I want you to keep it." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Grandma, I don't need a letter to remember her, or you." Margaret smiled faintly, her voice thin but steady. "One day, when you're older, when I'm gone, you'll read it again, and you'll understand how love can survive even in brokenness." She pressed the letter into Emily's hands. "Promise me you'll keep it safe. "I promise," Emily whispered, clutching it to her chest. The days grew shorter, the nights longer. Margaret's strength faded, but she never let go of Emily's hand when the girl sat beside her. They spoke of small things, the garden, the paintings, the neighbors, but also of deeper truths. "Emily," Margaret said one evening, her voice barely more than a breath, "you must never let the shadows of the past define you. Your mother fought to give you freedom, and I fought to keep it. Now, it's your turn to live bravely. Paint, love, laugh loudly. Carry us with you, but never let grief chain you." Emily nodded, her tears falling silently onto the quilt. "I'll make you proud. I swear it." "You already have," Margaret whispered, her lips curving into the faintest smile. That night, Emily stayed awake beside her, sketching as Margaret slept. In the soft glow of lamplight, she drew her grandmother's face, each line tenderly traced, each wrinkle honored like the rings of an ancient tree. She wanted to remember her like this, peaceful, strong, eternal. And then, in the early hours of dawn, as the snow outside turned to soft silver under the rising sun, Margaret's breaths grew slower. Her hand, still holding Emily's, loosened gently. Emily's sob broke the silence. She pressed her forehead against her grandmother's, whispering through her tears, "I'll keep my promise. I'll carry you with me, always." Margaret's face softened, her final breath slipping into the quiet like a sigh of release. The house was still, but Emily felt no emptiness. She felt her grandmother everywhere, the warmth in the blankets, the love in the painted walls, the strength in her own heart. Years later, Emily stood in a gallery filled with her work. On the central wall hung the most precious painting she had ever created, 3 figures, hand in hand, her as a child, Margaret at her side, and behind them, faint but radiant, Claire. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "For my mother and grandmother, who taught me that love is stronger than loss." The crowd moved through the gallery, pausing before the painting, some wiping tears, others whispering to one another. But Emily stood apart, her hand brushing against the folded letter she carried always in her bag, close to her heart. And in that moment, she felt them both, her mother's laughter, her grandmother's fierce strength, woven into her very being. She smiled softly, whispering into the quiet, "I kept my promise too." Did you enjoy this story? Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Enjoy, and comment below about your experience listening to this story.